The church was full. Hundreds of people had traveled from Lagos, Atlanta, London, and Abuja to witness what was supposed to be one of the biggest weddings of the year. Daniel Williams, a 32-year-old Nigerian-American businessman, was about to marry the woman he loved. Amora Okafor was beautiful, intelligent, and elegant. She was the daughter of one of Lagos's most powerful families. Everything about the wedding looked perfect. The flowers were white. The musicians were ready. The guests were dressed in their finest clothes. Photographers moved around the church, capturing every smile. Daniel stood at the altar in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. He looked nervous, but happy. Then Amora appeared. The entire church became silent. She walked slowly down the aisle in a beautiful white wedding gown. Daniel couldn't take his eyes off her. After everything they had been through, this was finally the moment he had dreamed about. Amora reached the altar. Daniel smiled. She smiled back. The pastor opened his Bible. The musicians prepared to play. And then, the church doors suddenly opened. Everyone turned. An old woman was standing there. She looked completely out of place. Her clothes were old and dirty. Her hair was gray. Her feet were bare. She looked like someone who had spent years sleeping on the streets. Security immediately moved toward her. People began whispering. Some guests laughed quietly. Others looked uncomfortable. But the woman didn't move. She slowly looked around the church. Then her eyes stopped on Daniel. She pointed directly at him. And in a trembling voice, she said, "Don't marry her." The music stopped. Daniel stared at the woman. Nobody understood what was happening. Amora looked confused. Her father became angry. "Security. Get her out of here." The guards began walking toward the woman. But before they could reach her, she said something that made Daniel's entire body freeze. "Because before tomorrow morning, your mother will be dead." The church went completely silent. Daniel's smile disappeared. He looked at his mother. Evelyn Williams was sitting in the front row. Her face had suddenly gone pale. Daniel looked back at the old woman. There was something about her face. Something familiar. Something he couldn't explain. Amora grabbed his hand. "Daniel, don't listen to her." But the old woman looked directly at Amora. And smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they already know the truth. "You still remember the blue house?" she asked. Amora's face changed. Daniel noticed immediately. The confidence disappeared from her eyes. The woman continued. "You were 6 years old." Amora stepped backward. Her father immediately moved between them. "Take this woman outside." But Daniel wasn't looking at the old woman anymore. He was looking at Amora. Because for the first time since he had known her, she looked afraid. 3 years earlier, Daniel had returned to Lagos from Atlanta. He had built a successful technology company and was already worth millions of dollars. Money had given him almost everything he wanted. A beautiful house. Luxury cars. Successful businesses. Private flights. A life most people could only dream about. But there was one thing his money couldn't buy. Peace. His mother wanted him to settle down. She wanted grandchildren. She wanted a woman who could become part of the Williams family. Daniel wasn't interested. Until he met Amora. They met at a charity foundation supported by Daniel's company. Daniel had gone there expecting to spend a few hours meeting staff and donating supplies. Instead, he met a woman who didn't even know who he was. He was standing in the middle of a hallway when Amora walked toward him. She looked at him and said, "You're blocking the children." Daniel laughed. Nobody had spoken to him like that in years. Most people treated him differently when they discovered how much money he had. Amora didn't care. She didn't even know. And somehow, that made him want to know everything about her. He started visiting the foundation more often. At first, he told himself it was because of the business. Then he admitted the truth. He was going there because of Amora. They talked. They laughed. They argued. They learned about each other's dreams. Daniel discovered that Amora cared deeply about children. She wanted to build schools. She wanted to help young people who had grown up without opportunities. She didn't dream about luxury. She dreamed about making a difference. Daniel fell in love with her slowly. First, he loved her confidence. Then her kindness. Then her smile. But there was something about Amora that he could never understand. She never talked about her childhood. Whenever Daniel asked about her parents, she changed the subject. One night, while they sat together on the balcony of his apartment overlooking Lagos, Daniel finally asked her, "Amora, what are you hiding?" She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Everybody has something they don't want to talk about." Daniel smiled. "Not me." Amora looked away. "You're wrong." Daniel didn't understand what she meant. He would later realize. She wasn't talking about herself. She was talking about him. Daniel's mother, Evelyn Williams, had always been suspicious of Amora. Evelyn was a powerful woman. After her husband died, she had helped build the family business into an empire. She was intelligent, strong, respected, and extremely protective of her son. She had one rule: never marry a woman you know nothing about. When she first met Amora, she didn't like her. But it wasn't because Amora was poor. It wasn't because she was ambitious. There was another reason. Evelyn recognized her. Not immediately. But something about Amora's eyes brought back a memory she had buried for decades. That night, after Amora left the house, Evelyn went into her bedroom. She locked the door. Then she opened an old wooden box. Inside was a photograph. Two young women were standing beside a baby. One of the women was Evelyn. The other was a woman named Grace. Grace had been Evelyn's best friend. And the baby in the photograph was Amora. Evelyn stared at the picture. Her hands began to shake. On the back of the photograph were 6 words. "If anything happens to me, protect my daughter." Evelyn closed her eyes. Then she whispered, "I'm sorry." 26 years earlier, Evelyn and Grace had been best friends. They had dreamed of building successful businesses together. They eventually opened a small clothing company in Lagos. Everything seemed perfect. Until Grace discovered something dangerous. Daniel's father had been secretly moving company money into overseas accounts. Millions of dollars were disappearing. Grace discovered the evidence. She threatened to expose him. A few days later, Grace disappeared. Everyone was told that she had abandoned her family. Everyone believed she had run away. But Evelyn knew the truth. Grace had been murdered. And her 6-year-old daughter had been left behind. Evelyn had promised Grace that she would protect Amora. But she was afraid. She secretly placed the little girl with another family. She hoped that keeping Amora away from the Williams family would keep her safe. Years passed. Amora grew up. And eventually, Evelyn lost track of her. Until Daniel brought her home. Evelyn couldn't believe it. The little girl she had tried to protect was now standing in her house. And worse. She was in love with her son. But Evelyn wasn't the only person who knew the truth. There was another man. Richard Williams. Daniel's uncle. Richard had helped Daniel's father move the stolen money. He had also been involved in Grace's. For 26 years, He had protected the family's reputation. He had built his own wealth from the secrets he was hiding. But when he discovered that Amora was Grace's daughter, he became terrified. Because Grace had left behind evidence. Evidence that could destroy him. And now Amora was about to marry Daniel. Richard knew that once she officially became part of the family, she would eventually discover everything. So he decided to destroy her before that happened. The first warning came 2 weeks before the wedding. Amora received an anonymous message. Leave Daniel before you destroy him. She ignored it. A few minutes later, another message arrived. Ask your mother why she disappeared. Amora stared at the screen. Her mother had been dead for 20 years. She had never told Daniel much about her. Her hands began to shake. Then another message arrived. This time there was a photograph attached. Amora opened it. Her heart stopped. It was a photograph of her mother standing beside Daniel's father. Amora stared at the picture for several minutes. Why had her mother been standing with him? Why had nobody ever told her? And why was someone sending her these messages now? She called the number. Nobody answered. The next morning, Amora decided to investigate. She traveled to an old neighborhood in Lagos. There was an abandoned house there. It was the house where her mother had once lived. The walls were damaged. The windows were broken. The garden had become overgrown. Amora stood outside for several minutes. She felt like she was standing in front of a piece of her own childhood that had been erased. An elderly neighbor recognized her. She stared at Amora's face. Then she said, "You are Grace's daughter." Amora's heart raced. "You knew my mother?" The woman nodded. "Your mother didn't run away." Amora stepped closer. "What happened to her?" The woman looked around nervously. Then she whispered. "She was running from someone." "Who?" The old woman looked toward the road. Then she said, "The Williams family." Amora couldn't breathe. She asked why. The woman pointed toward an old tree behind the house. "Your mother hid something there." Amora walked toward the tree. She began digging. At first, she found nothing. Then her fingers touched metal. She pulled the object from the ground. It was a small rusted box. Inside was a flash drive. There was also a handwritten note. "Give this to my daughter when she is ready." Amora took the box home. That night, she opened the flash drive. There was only one video file. She clicked it. The screen showed her mother. Grace looked older than Amora remembered. Her eyes were tired. She looked frightened. "If you're watching this," Grace said, "then I am probably dead." Amora covered her mouth. Grace continued. "Your father didn't abandon us. He was killed." Amora began crying. She had spent her entire life believing her father had simply disappeared. Now she was learning that he had been murdered. Grace continued. "And the people responsible are closer to you than you think." Amora stopped the video. Her heart was pounding. She couldn't continue. But then she remembered one thing. The person Grace had mentioned. Evelyn. Amora pressed play again. Grace looked directly into the camera. "Evelyn knows." The video ended. Amora sat frozen. Evelyn. Daniel's mother. The woman she had grown to trust. The woman who had welcomed her into the family. The woman who had been sitting in the front row of her wedding. How much did she know? The next morning, Amora went straight to Evelyn. She didn't say hello. She didn't sit down. She simply asked, "Did you know my mother?" Evelyn's face went pale. "Who told you?" That's not an answer. Evelyn slowly sat down. For years, She had carried the secret. Now there was nowhere left to hide. Yes, she said. I knew your mother. Amora's eyes filled with tears. Did you know what happened to her? Evelyn looked down. I was supposed to protect you. Amora's voice broke. Then why didn't you? Evelyn began crying. Because I was afraid. Afraid of who? Evelyn whispered one name. Richard. Amora stood completely still. Evelyn told her everything. Richard had helped Daniel's father steal millions from the company. Grace discovered the truth. She threatened to expose them. Richard arranged for her to disappear. But Grace had recorded everything. She had hidden evidence. And that evidence was still somewhere. Evelyn had spent 26 years afraid that Richard would discover it. Why didn't you tell Daniel? Amora asked. Evelyn looked at her. Because Richard threatened him. If I exposed the truth, I was afraid Daniel would be next. Amora wiped her tears. I have to tell Daniel. Evelyn grabbed her hand. Not yet. But they were already too late. Someone had been standing outside the room. Listening. Richard. He heard everything. And he knew that his secret was about to be exposed. Richard changed his plan. He decided to make Amora look guilty. He planted stolen company documents inside her apartment. Then he anonymously sent the information to the police. The next morning, Amora was arrested. Daniel couldn't believe it. His fiancée was accused of stealing millions from his company. Richard stood beside him. I warned you about her. Daniel looked at Amora through the glass window at the police station. She was crying. Daniel, I didn't do this. Daniel wanted to believe her. But the evidence looked convincing. For the first time in their relationship, Daniel wasn't sure who to trust. Then he remembered something Amora had once told him. When everybody tells you someone is guilty, ask yourself who benefits from you believing it. Daniel started investigating the documents himself. He checked the timestamps. Something was wrong. The files had been created after Amora was supposedly responsible for stealing them. Someone had planted the evidence. Daniel went straight to Richard. You did this? Richard laughed. You have no idea what you're accusing me of. Daniel stepped closer. Then why are you afraid? Richard's smile disappeared. For the first time, Daniel saw something he had never seen before. Fear. His uncle was hiding something. Daniel returned to his father's old house. He searched through old documents, photographs, business records, boxes that nobody had opened for years. Then he noticed something strange. A wall in his father's old study sounded hollow. He moved the painting. Behind it was a hidden safe. Inside the safe was an old cassette tape. There was also a photograph of Grace. Daniel turned the photograph over. There was handwriting on the back. She knows everything. Daniel's hands began to shake. He found an old cassette player. He put the tape inside. His father's voice filled the room. I made mistakes. Daniel listened. His father confessed that Richard had been involved in the company's illegal activities. Then came the part Daniel never expected. His father admitted that Richard had ordered Grace's murder. Daniel dropped the tape. His entire family had been built on a lie. He immediately went to find Amora. He told her everything. She cried. Not because she hated his family. Because she realized her mother had spent her entire life waiting for justice. Daniel took her hand. I don't care what my family did. I choose you. But outside the house, Richard was watching them. He knew the evidence existed. And he knew tomorrow was the wedding. Richard made one final decision. If he couldn't destroy Amora, He would destroy Evelyn. And that was how we arrived at the wedding. The old woman stood in the middle of the church. Daniel finally walked toward her. Who are you? The woman slowly removed the necklace around her neck. Daniel recognized it immediately. It belonged to Grace. The old woman looked at Amara. My name is Esther. I was your mother's best friend. Amara began crying. Esther continued. I've been looking for you for 20 years. Then she turned toward Evelyn. You promised Grace you'd protect her. Evelyn lowered her head. The church became silent. Esther explained why she had waited so long. She had witnessed Grace being taken away. She knew who was responsible. But she had been afraid. She spent decades gathering evidence. Then she discovered that Amara was marrying Daniel. She knew Richard would never allow the marriage to happen. Not because he hated Amara, but because he feared what she would discover. Esther looked at Daniel. Your uncle killed your father's partner. Daniel's face went cold. Then Esther said. And your mother helped him hide it. Everyone turned toward Evelyn. Evelyn didn't deny it. She stepped forward. I didn't kill anyone. Her voice broke. But I was afraid. She explained that Richard had threatened Daniel. If she exposed him, Daniel would die. So she stayed silent. For 26 years. Daniel looked at his mother. You should have trusted me. Evelyn began crying. I was trying to keep you alive. Then Richard suddenly stood. You are all fools. He looked around the church. He thought he could still escape. But Daniel had already sent the evidence to the police. Sirens could be heard outside. Richard tried to leave. He didn't make it past the church entrance. Police officers surrounded him. For the first time in 26 years, Richard had nowhere to hide. As they handcuffed him, he looked at Daniel. You destroyed your own family. Daniel looked him directly in the eyes. No. You did that yourself. Richard was taken away. The church remained silent. The wedding was over. Daniel turned toward Amara. He looked at her for a moment. Then he asked, Are you still willing to marry me? Amara smiled through her tears. Not today. Daniel looked surprised. Then she laughed. I'm hungry. For the first time that day, everyone laughed. 6 months later, Daniel and Amara held another wedding. This time, there were no politicians. No television cameras. No huge crowds. Just family and close friends. Amara wore a simple white dress. Daniel wore a traditional Nigerian agbada. Evelyn sat in the front row. She was different now. She no longer cared about protecting the family name. She cared about telling the truth. And beside her sat Esther. The woman who had brought the truth back into their lives. After the ceremony, Evelyn gave Amara one final thing. A letter. It had been written by Grace 26 years earlier. Amara opened it. The first line made her cry. My daughter, if you ever read this, remember that your life is bigger than what happened to me. Grace wrote about forgiveness. Not forgetting. Not pretending the past never happened. But refusing to let someone else's evil control the rest of your life. Amara folded the letter. She looked at Evelyn. Then she hugged her. Some wounds don't disappear. But sometimes. They finally stop bleeding. Daniel eventually understood something his father never had. Money can buy houses. Cars. Businesses. Security. But money cannot buy peace. His family had spent decades protecting an empire built on fear. And in the end, the truth cost them far less than the lie had. Daniel sold several businesses connected to his father's corruption. He used the money to build a foundation. The foundation was named after Grace. Its mission was simple: to help children who had lost their parents find safe homes and receive an education. Amora became the director. And every year, they helped thousands of children. One morning, Daniel went looking for Esther. But she was gone. Nobody knew where she had gone. The only thing she left behind was the necklace. Amora held it tightly. On the back was a small engraving. 3 words. Love survives truth. Amora smiled. She finally understood why Esther had stopped the wedding. She hadn't come to destroy their love. She had come to make sure their love was built on the truth. Years later, Daniel and Amora sat together on the balcony of their home. Their children were playing in the garden. Lagos was glowing beneath them. Amora looked at Daniel. "Do you ever regret marrying me?" Daniel laughed. "I almost lost you before I married you." She smiled. Then he became serious. "No. Because if I had listened to everyone who told me what to believe, I would have lost the best thing that ever happened to me." Amora looked toward the sunset. Their story had started with money. Then fear. Then betrayal. But it ended with something money could never buy. Truth. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. Sometimes the person everyone tells you to walk away from is the person who was sent into your life to teach you how to see clearly. Because love without truth is only a beautiful lie. And sometimes, the greatest thing you can inherit from your family is not their money. It is the courage to break the cycle. And when the truth finally comes knocking, you have only 2 choices. You can run from it, or you can open the door. The Williams family spent 26 years running. But in the end, the truth caught up with them. And it changed everything.